Good morning, Scott in Colorado here. It is October 29th, 2017. This story be best told in the dark, laddies, because I will be telling ye a ghost story. This be a real story, no embellishments. I don't embellish in my stories because I don't need to, lads and lassies. There's no reason to. I don't need to. Your life has been intense enough without having to change things around and make it more exciting. If anything, I leave out details because it's too gory or bloody or too intense, or not for the faint of heart, as it were. To start the story, I'll first tell you a related story, directly related, that my son told me, involving this same residence. All right, I'll drop the silly Irish accent. I can't do it very well. I used to live in Ireland. But anyways, my son told me that he had a co-worker, who he's friends with, who had just moved out of a home, 100-plus-year-old house, 2-story. And my son asked him, well, why did you move out? And he says, well, I'll tell you what, this man was married, young man. He had a 5-year-old son and his wife. And they're in this house for about 6 months. He said the reason that he moved out was that he had been awakened in the middle of the night by what he thought was his 5-year-old daughter shaking his foot at the bottom of the bed. He looked up and he saw what he thought was his 5-year-old daughter. It was not his daughter. And he could see through this personage. That kind of freaked him out. But then his wife and he repeatedly saw in the middle of the night this 5-year-old who wasn't there, who was apparently fairly transparent or translucent. His daughter, who was 5 years old, had a playmate and always talked about this imaginary playmate and described the same personage. There were always lights. He said that there was always lights left on. There was noises in the house. He knew that he'd turned off lights, but when he came back to the house, the lights were on. He couldn't explain it. At some point, it freaked him and his wife out enough that they moved out. My son told him, well, that's very interesting because I've got another story for you about that residence. And he told them, his friend, this story. I was on patrol, graveyard shift. It was about 3:30 in the morning, perhaps, in the summertime. We had a standing, basically a vacation check, we used to call it, of residences that were empty or people were on vacation. And we'd be in the squad room and they'd tell us to check on these residences to make sure that nobody was there. Hey, these people are gone, and check on them as a courtesy. Anyways, I was told that this residence was empty. Nobody lived there. If we ever saw any activity or anything going on in that residence, it was suspicious. It was probably a burglar or a trespasser. They weren't supposed to be there. I'm laying down in bed. That's why in the dark. It's like 6 o'clock in the morning right now. Anyways, I was driving by. I generally, when I was on patrol, I always had my windows down, even if it was 20 or 30 below zero, because you need to be able to hear. That's one of your senses. And if you're a police officer, you need to be able to hear as you're driving down the road. I'm cruising along. I'm doing maybe 15, 20 miles an hour. Sounds can be heard very well at night. They travel a long distance. Anyways, I'm cruising along. I looked off to my left to look at this residence, make sure that there's no activity there. As I generally did. It wasn't very far from the police department. It was only a few blocks. As I left the station doing reports, I think it was, in the middle of the night. Anyways, as I drove by, I saw that there was a light on, a single light, and it was a light bulb. There were these, is it a bay window? There was kind of a curved window. There were, I believe, 3 or 4 panes on it. As it came around, it was a curved place where it looked like there was a couch at the base of it. I couldn't see through. I didn't know at that time that there was a couch there. But it was about a 6-foot long couch. And there were, I believe, 3 windows. A smallish window on the left, smaller window, well, very tall, but narrow. Window left, right, and a big picture window in the center. There was what appeared to be a tricot curtain. It wasn't made out of tricot. I think it was made out of cotton or something, because it was very old. It would have been before perhaps tricot existed. I don't know. But it appeared to be tricot, translucent curtain. And I could see through this curtain and see a bare bulb hanging about 6.5 feet high in the middle of the ceiling in this old home, very old home, very high ceilings, about 12-foot ceilings, and downstairs and up, very tall 2-story. There was a front porch. This is all wood home. Paint was white, paint was peeling, peaked roof up high. Basically looked like an old haunted house. Anyways, I saw there was light on. I pulled over to the right. It blacked out. We have a switch in the squad cars that you can flip down underneath the dash that will turn off any signals, electricity to the brake lights. So you can black out, turn off your headlamps, flip the switch, and it won't even show your brake lights coming on. You completely blacked out, and I killed the engine. All right, and I coasted to a stop. Pulled over to the curb. I looked. I'd been looking to my left. I saw the house. The front was facing away from me and to the side window, and it was facing to the east, or to the west rather. I was facing west, and I could look into my rear view mirror, or my side view mirror, my driver's side view mirror, and then turn my head and look at the residence. And I could see the light bulb on there in the middle of the front room, the great room in the home. As I watched and listened, I could see what appeared to be paperback books or kind of heavy pamphlets fly, and I could hear them flutter through the air. They would hit the tricot. I could see the shadow of these things. They would hit the tricot curtain, which would flap back and forth. Then they would hit the big picture window, large picture window, make a thump. And then I could see the shadow of this book or pamphlet fall to the ground. And this repeated over and over. At some point, one of these books or pamphlets hit the single light bulb, like a 60-watt light bulb. It was uncovered, and it would swing on its cord. Swing back and forth. I could hear no yelling, no screaming, just the flutter, the impact against the window, and the shaking of the tricot curtain and the swinging of the light bulb. Obviously, sorry, I covered up the camera. Obviously, somebody was in the residence. I called for my partner, who was, I believe he was in the office as well doing reports. We'd had some DUIs or some arrests, and he was doing paperwork as well and just finishing up. I called him. I said, hey, get over here. I'll call him John. Get over here. I've got somebody in the so-and-so residence. So he came over. He was just 3 blocks away. And so he's there very quickly. And I watched this occurring from my squad car, just sitting there, for a good 2.5, 3 minutes before he arrived. The lamp turned off, the light turned off in the home, and we went we went to the front door, and it was bolted shut, locked. We went around the side, and it was ajar, about an inch and a half. There's no lights on the inside, no sounds. We entered first. It was the kitchen, and there was a table in the kitchen. On this table, we had very bright flashlights, was a place setting for one person. There was a cup, there was a glass cup, there was a plate. On this plate was a fork. It had green beans on it that were stabbed. These were dried out and dusty. There were green beans, and there was some kind of a meat on the plate that was all dried out. There had been what looked like perhaps grape juice in the cup. It had evaporated. It was completely dry, but you could see the stains on it. There was a pot, green beans, and some other food on the table that were covered. Green beans, I believe, was uncovered. It had dried out, very dry. We later opened up the fridge. It was full of food, rotted. It was the odor was horrific. Of course, we didn't take the time to open the fridge immediately. We were clearing the house because somebody was in there. As we went off the kitchen, as we quickly moved through the house, we pulled all our guns. This is at gunpoint. We went into I guess you could call it living room. And as we went in, there was a side bedroom with a little bed in it in the back off the kitchen. Then we went into this, I guess I'd call it a living room. There was a long room, very long room, went all the way up to the front of the house. We couldn't see through that because there was a heavy curtain that went from ceiling to floor, a very old, that would slide back and forth. In this room was an very old phonograph with the big bell, the RCA insignia that has a big honking bell on it, with a needle. You wind it up, and then it spins the record around the big, thick platters, and no electricity to this thing. And it would play. It was probably worth a lot of money. Sitting there, as we looked at it later, there were some Black Sabbath records, some very heavy metal recordings. Apparently some kids had been in there at some point. We went through, nobody in that room. We went through, and there's some very, very old records, Tommy Dorsey records and so forth, from the 30s and 40s. Newspapers going back to 1930s, very, very old wartime 1940s newspapers. Went through the curtain into the front room, which was the room where I could see the light and saw the activity occurring. Went into this room. In the middle of the room was hanging a single light bulb, about 6.5 feet high. There were Trico curtains. There was a couch up against the curtains in the front windows. There was nobody in there. There was a piano off to my left in the corner. And we cleared this room. Turned out there was a loaded handgun, a Colt, very first generation Colt autoloader, 9mm. No, I think it was a 380. It was a 380 caliber. Underneath a cushion in there. Of course, I didn't discover that immediately. There were octagon barrel rifles behind the piano, hidden in the corner. There's 3 or 4 of them, antiques. There was an old-fashioned typewriter that, of course, no electricity to it, manual typewriter, and the keys struck from the left and the right. They weren't all in a curve, but they struck left and they struck from the right. And there was a half-written letter in that stopped in mid-sentence on this typewriter. We went upstairs, very narrow stairs, went upstairs into bedrooms, bathroom. There's no water. The water had been shut off. We went and flipped the light switches to try to get some illumination as we went into these rooms. It's always better to have a light on rather than just your flashlight. And as you go in, you'd flip the light. As soon as you saw that there's light there, we got our gun out, hit the light switch, turn on, illuminate the place, see everything, rather than just a single light beam. Went upstairs, nobody there. There was nobody in the house. We went back through the house, checked under beds very carefully, checked in closets. We went through the whole thing. Took probably 25 minutes to clear the whole house and look in every little cubby hole, every pantry, under every bed, lots of dust. Nobody had been in there other than some kids in the front room playing with that old phonograph, playing these old vinyl records, and even older. I guess they hadn't been playing the Tommy Dorsey records, which were actually made for the phonograph. But anyways, there was nobody in the house. We went back outside, trying to figure out, well, why is there no power in the house? Of course, there shouldn't be. There's nobody's living there. That makes sense. And looked up the telephone, the power line. The power line had been cut by the power company, and they had cut out about a 40 to, it was probably 50-foot section, and cut it from the power pole and taken out the wire and cut it from the top of the house. So there was no electricity in the house. It had no access to electricity. There's no way that electricity could be provided to this home. There is absolutely no way that that light bulb could have been illuminated. You tell me what I saw, as I would like to know. I think I know, but there are things in this world that you cannot explain, that we cannot see. There's material finer than what we can see. But my partner said, let's get the hell out of here. He was scared to death. Things like that don't really scare me, but because I believe that we're made up of body and a body and a spirit, and our spirit and the body together make up our soul. But I'd like to know what went on in that home. It was a very, very dark feeling spiritually in that home. From the minute we entered it and got into the property, a very, very dark feeling. That's my ghost story. And the guy, Tyler, my son Tyler, told his friend this story. The friend's eyes lit up and he says, well, I wish that I would have known that before I rented that place. And Tyler says, well, I didn't know you were even in that house. Otherwise, I would have told you the story. And he says, you probably wouldn't have believed me. And his friend said, no, I don't think I would have. Anyways, that's my one true-to-life ghost story. Take care. Love you guys. Talk to you later.